One of the first things I tell my engineering students each semester is that our field isn't about finding the right answer, but rather finding the best answer given the problem statement. And I suspect this is the primary reason that the game of Flesh and Blood has captivated me as a player. Every hand is its own little problem to be solved. How can we maximize the value either on this turn or in the future? How can we best play it given the situation at hand? Today, I wanted to run through an example that came up as I was prepping for my Armory event last weekend, and how examples like this truly highlight what Flesh and Blood's brilliant gameplay can offer. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Go Again, a fabulous cast here on Dice Commando. Thanks so much for tuning in today for kind of an interesting and different cast. I say interesting because it's not often that I fanboy out like this. But it's also not often that we get a solid, concrete example laid right in front of us of why we fanboy out to begin with. So, before last weekend's Armory event, I was going through my pre-tourney routine. When my son goes down for his nap, I generally have a bit of quiet time, which I use to prep for that evening's tournament, both physically in terms of getting everything together, sleeved up, and so on, but also mentally. I like to do what many other players do, shuffle up and draw a series of test hands, of sorts, and challenge myself to identify the correct, or should I probably say optimal, play lines. I play through the options, evaluate any mixes or changes if I'm not happy with how those things are going, and so on. Last week, I was bringing Kassai to our Blitz Armory. Now, just to put into perspective those that may not watch as often, I have just a bit of experience with Kassai. Sure, I had made a few tweaks to the deck last week based on what I was seeing in the meta and what I was expecting to see that night, but by no means was this a new deck to me. I was simply just going through and getting myself into the right mindset. So I poured an IPA and sat down to my draws, and this was the first hand that I drew. So I looked at it, and I decided on my line of play. It was easy peasy. Or was it? Because I looked again, and well, now this is interesting. There are, in fact, several different ways to play this hand on a turn 0, and each has its own advantages and disadvantages based simply on who I'm sitting across from. That is to say, I don't believe there's only one right answer. Instead, there are best answers depending on the very situation, and I obviously found it fascinating enough to want to talk about. So today I wanted to go through this hand and look at the different lines of play, the different options available for us on what might be the best in any given scenario. And I do want to point out on this hand, this is not a god hand. By no means is this a super special hand. It's actually a relatively average hand. And I think that's kind of the point of why I think this embodies what I'm trying to say about how this, to me, is the best part of Flesh and Blood, because every hero has situations like this multiple times through the game where you just have a hand and you kind of have to figure out how to put the pieces together. In fact, a lot of times if you get god hands, it's actually a straighter line of play than if you just get a normal hand. All right, so let's go ahead and go into this. Now, first, let's go ahead and get out of the way. We'll start. You're not always attacking first, right? You don't always win the die roll and choose to go first. Sometimes you're defending. So what I like to do when I do the test hands is I say, okay, what are my priorities, right? What am I blocking with first? What do I want last? Do I want to save anything? Stuff like that. So when I look at this hand, I have for Kassai, right? She wants the goes again, and I have in this hand 2 goes again. Run through is the cheaper, more efficient one. Now, so Driving Blade is going to actually be my first one that I defend with. And the reason for that is you don't need 2 go agains in hand. We're going to try and keep run through because it works really, really, really well, and it's cheaper. And then after Driving Blade, I'm unfortunately going to go with Outland Skirmish. The reason for that is that I certainly want Outland Skirmish on the next hand. I would love to have that. That said, I don't want to sack my blood on the hands unless I really have to. I would ideally like to use blood in her hands as like a pitch card early on so it can go in my deck, and then maybe I can tutor it later. So it's going to be Driving Blade, then Outland Skirmish, then blood her hands, and then very last, run through. So that's the approach that I think I take, primarily because you're not guaranteed to draw a blue, and if you stick with Driving Blade, then you're looking at 2-card pitch. So I think run through is the right way to go there. Unfortunately, Driving Blade, as good as it is, I think it has to be our first block. Outland Skirmish has to be our second block. And you know what? I think in this case, if they just Arsenal pass, Even if it's Icelander, I think we're okay with that because we still have lines of play. All right, so now talking about each of these cards from an offensive point of view. I mean, sure, we have to consider the offensive part of it in order to get to the point where we can determine the defense order. But there's a couple different points here, right? So Outland Skirmish is a very, especially Red Outland Skirmish, very good card because remember, it threatens the copper the entire turn, so it carries. So generally, we want to lead with that. But there's a certain problem. I mean, it's not a problem, but there's a concern on that in terms of it balances out and it actually makes their blocking a little easier. So in one case here, there is an argument to be made for actually holding Outland Skirmish and putting it on the back pump. Now remember, Run Through also puts it on the back swing, right? It's a back pump, back swing. So that's, you can basically kind of go small, see if they maybe overblock, thinking you've got a reprise or something like that, and then just load up on the second swing. So that's an option there as well. Driving Blade, ideally, if I'm going first, I actually want to try an Arsenal Driving Blade here. Now, if I had a blue, it would be a different situation, but I don't. So, right, because Driving Blade is going to cost us 2 cards to be able to go and swing, because we're not going to pop equipment turn 1, right, or turn 0. We're not going to pop equipment. So in this case, Run Through is that is our go again, right? In most of these cases, that's going to be go on our again. And the reason for that is, it's turn 0. They're going to get a lot of blocks, and we want to be able to arsenal a card. So for our success criteria, right, my success criteria on this turn for me is maybe get damage 1 or 2 points in, but really what I'm trying to do here is generate a couple coppers, because then they have to worry about that for the next blood on their hands, because they're going to see this one. Putting blood in our hands in the arsenal early sounds good, but not, right? We don't want to clog up our arsenal. So my preferred arsenal slot, at least as I see it, is Driving Blade. But let's go ahead and run through the different lines that are available to us. Right, so probably the least optimal for the majority of heroes here is to pitch Outland and Blood in our hands, creating 3 so we can driving, swing, swing. So this creates, this is 5, threatens 6 on the first swing, threatening 1 copper, and then 2 threaten 3, threatening 1 copper. That slash there, of course, being that Centauris get the boost if they defend with an attack action card. Now, the bonus here is this does allow us to arsenal, Run Through, but it doesn't threaten maybe necessarily as much. Now, so when we want to do this, it's someone I think that we're pretty sure is going to mostly block, right? They're probably not going to keep very many cards back. They're very obsessed with making us stop copper, and then we can potentially use up everything and kind of make them fresh draw. So this is, again, I think the less optimal when we're looking at it, but I do think there are certain situations in which we want to use this. Now, the second option, and this is probably the mostest, bestest, more bestest option, is to pitch Blood on our hands. So lead with an Outland, and then you pitch Blood on our hands to swing. So that's a 5/6, threatening 2 copper effectively, right? Because remember, Outland will carry for the whole turn. So that's a 5/6, and then we're, of course, going to run through that. The Run Through then pumps the second swing, which lets us go a 5/6 threatening copper, 4/5 threatening copper, and then they've got that additional copper the whole time. That's really weird math in terms of blocking, and I think you're going to end up maybe only getting a point to your damage, but you're probably going to end up getting 2 copper, because remember, Kassai is 1 for each hit, and then you'll have 1 for Outland. So I think that likely you're going to end up producing 2 copper, which I think for turn 0 is a pretty good win, plus it allows us to put Driving Blade in arsenal. So I think that's a really good potential option there. One more thing we can do, I was talking about switching Outland. We can absolutely, and there's an argument to be made for this, we can absolutely switch the order in which we play Outland. Now, the drawback of that is it doesn't let the on-hit effect float the whole turn. The negative of that is that, the negative of that is that it doesn't float the whole turn. The positive of that is it's kind of cheeky, right? It's kind of a cheeky play. So, and do keep in mind, I'm looking at the image now, Run Through is an attack reaction, so it would actually go on the first Cintauri Saber. But you guys get the point here, right? So we pitch Blood on our hands to produce for the turn on Cintauri and then Run Through. And then that second swing is a 7/8 threatening 2 copper. And if you really look at the math on that, they probably blocked 3. Maybe they overblocked, thinking we had a reprise or something like that. If they do overblock, they actually can't stop the second Saber. So again, like I said, I think this is a really cheeky play, and I think that this may actually end up being, it's definitely less good from an obvious standpoint because you want to have that outland first. But I think this is actually a very interesting play. It still leaves us with Driving Blade in Arsenal next time, hoping we get a blue, and then we can go from there. So I think that's a really good option as well. And then last, and this is probably my least preferred option, because if I'm going first, I really want to get a card in Arsenal, right? So, but we could lead with Outland and then go driving, pitching both Run Through and Blood in our hands, and then we're coming in with 8-9, threatening 1 with the 1 from Outland Skirmish. And then to point out here, actually, we have 1 extra floating, so if they do let that 1 hit, which is unlikely, but if they do let that, actually, it might not be unlikely. If you think about it, depending on who you're playing, if it's, somebody who has a lot of 2 blocks or something like that, they may let the first one hit because you'll be out of cards in your hand, so they know you don't have reprise. So they may let it hit for 1 or 2 because they know they've got the second swing coming as well. So again, it's one of those scenarios where sometimes, depending on who you're playing, could be good. Now, the part I don't like about this option is that you don't get an Arsenal out of it. But like I said, or like I was trying to say, and then I got distracted, you also have a floating on this one, where you can potentially, if the first swing does hit, you can pump your bracers or use your bracers as well. So it would actually be coming in 3-4 on the backside. Again, which then, everybody, that's a 2-card block. So, or they're throwing equipment in front of it, which I think is a win. So again, this certainly seems like the less optimal play, but if you compare it all, it's also an option that may be the right scenario in a lot of, if somebody like Lexi, maybe. Yeah, probably Lexi or maybe Runeblades who have a lot of 2 blocks with the non-attacks. This could be an option to slide in 2-3 damage and create potentially 3 coppers. So very interesting. So those are the only 4 the only 4 play lines that I was able to come up with. There may be others that you guys can come up with there. But hopefully you guys see my point, and where I'm going with this is the level of complexity and the level of options and thinking that we have to do is there's no shortage of it. And I love that about this game. It's just very fascinating that you can sit in a 4-card hand. Heck, we just sat and talked for 15 minutes about a 4-card hand. That's pretty crazy. It's pretty impressive. Just the design on this game, the complexity of this game, and the way it works is truly fascinating, and I love it. So anyway, folks, that's it for me today. I would love to hear from you guys. First off, what do you think about my play lines and stuff? What am I missing? What could I do better? Am I a bad Kassai player? Probably am. But what do you love about the game, right? Does this kind of stuff entertain you? Is it more the deck building for you? What is it? So let me know in the comments below. And if nothing else, folks, go Commando.